Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam, sir. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you, ma'am?
I'm absolutely fine. How is your Ramzan going, sir?
As usual, it is a lot of heat, scorching sunlight, sweltering heat. It is very difficult. Though
So true,
being a
so true.
diabetic, I'm not, observing fast, but my family members are. They
Yes,
are
yes. Same
observing
here almost.
these. Yeah, so I should
Right,
not tell lie and that in the month of Ramzan. So I admit that I'm not keeping fast because of medical
right,
reasons,
right.
for medical
Yes,
advice.
yes. Even my parents don't observe fast because they have,
Mm,
different diseases in the old age.
yeah, I understand.
Sir, did you discuss South Asia in the last class? I had to leave the class half hour ago in the last week. So did we discuss South Asian part?
I intend to give a full-fledged treatment to, though I am making certain important references regarding the South Asia and what exactly is the position of the media freedom in South Asia. But I intend to discuss because we have also devoted a week to South Asia as well. I would be discussing, but I have made certain important detailed references. I will share the video link with you. Yeah.
Sir, in the last class, I'm asking this question because in the last class, when we were discussing United Nations approach, we were discussing African Charter and European Convention. We almost discussed every region of the world. That what's their approach towards freedom of expression and their laws and the different approaches of the courts, especially inter-American court and European Court of Human Rights. But we didn't discuss SARC region, right? The, individually
Yeah,
were discussed, but I don't think that obviously we did discuss SARC approach as an organization towards
yeah, that is why
freedom of
that is why
speech.
I am, that is why I intend to cover the South Asian region in a one dedicated class. So
Okay,
the
sir.
entire region will be dedicated. So that this is what I am planning, and there is a week for that purpose also. That there should be a
Mhm.
separate treatment. What exact position of the media houses, role of media in governance, and other important aspects. But there is a global trend, and the global trend is encapsulating each and every aspect of our engagement and the media trends, media patterns, behavior, and the nexus between the political establishments in a geopolitical entity on one side, and it is the media houses or the corporate houses on the other side. How the media governance has been witnessing different trends and different implications. So entire ramifications would be deliberated separately. At the same time, on every engagement, on every occasion, I have also been highlighting these trends as well as these aspects. So definitely I would be
Mhm.
coming out with a separate what we call deliberation on this. Even if you haven't pointed it out, I intended that I must discuss all these aspects.
Sir, I have some observations to make, like from the past week that we were discussing.
Yes, please.
Sir, I think there is so much diversity regarding the media landscape in global South or in
Yeah.
Asia, so to say, because on one hand we find state-controlled one-party journalism in China. On the other hand, we find market-driven model in India, and we also
Mm.
find public service broadcasting in the countries like South Korea and Japan. So I think the rise of globalization has led to the rapid liberalization, privatization of media, and deregulation. So I think it has completely transformed the media landscape in Asia. And we find that the increasing role of TV and social media and online news in shaping the public opinion, especially
Mm.
nowadays that we are witnessing in Pakistan. So I think we find a Western narrative of freedom and democracy, which is, liberal media theory. Well, when we talk about the normative framework for media freedom, but on the other hand, China challenges this narrative with authoritarian narrative. So I think there is a dichotomy. We find this dichotomy in this in the framework for media freedom. But I personally feel that South Asian nations don't fit in this bipolar construction, because we usually find that if one political party is in the opposition, then it talks about the freedom of speech and freedom of expression. But when the same party forms a majority government in the parliament, then the same party cracks down on the media outlets. So I think South Asian nations do not fit, and they find a clash of authoritarianism and liberalism in the media framework. So and also these nations have such enriched histories, ethnic, cultural and linguistic divides. So I think that South Asian nations and Asian nations, because there is so much diversity, they should contribute towards building and shaping an inclusive theory of global journalism that should incorporate their diversive ideas and their diversive frameworks. That's it, sir. That's what I just understood
Very
from the lecture that we
fantastic.
discussed.
No, no, thank you very much. It's a fantastic observation on your part. You have touched upon each and every aspect, the role of media in global south and what exactly we have been doing. But at the same time, we should not forget the political transformation of media. Because I am taking this debate further in this particular, ingredient. Because we have already deliberated access to information dimension and what kind of information should be there. As on the last occasion Mr. Sagar Verma has also pointed it out, and if I club both the observations and particularly your detailed account of the role of media and what exactly has been the role of media in global south, and different narratives are all there, and you have deliberated globalization, pluralism of media, but there are other important dimensions relating to cosmopolitanism, multiculturalism, diversity. That is one important aspect which you have also rightly observed and given a very befitting what we call account of diversity. But at the same time, it is equally important, while taking into considerations all these aspects, it is equally important, ma'am, that we should try to understand what exactly has been the emergence of media at a global level, at what we call regional level, at national level, and how media has been emerging and dictating even the governance institutions in some of the quarters. That should also be taken into consideration, and what exactly has been the role of of technology, how this glorious fourth estate has emerged as another important organ of the state. We have already studied in our comparative constitutional law classes. There, traditionally speaking, there are three important, or the threefold what we call branches separation of powers, but that is not at all sufficient. It is going beyond that understanding, and understanding is that the media, along with other important what we call institutions, but media has come to stay as a separate what we call entity, as one of the emerging organs of the state. And that is why I intend to what we call deliberate the interdependence of the legal institutions and journalism. At the same time, I intend to what we call deliberate the future of journalism, while taking into considerations, or in the light of this observation which you have made, along with my submissions, what I intend to what we call understand how media doctrine, how media has come to stay as a doctrine that is calling the shots in the corridors of powers. To what extent the bias which we have been witnessing, predilections in favor of some of the governance institutions on the part of media, and how it is going to establish its legitimacy, and what are the restrictions there we have to take into account. At the same time, the make believe world of what we call of television and other important what we call gadgets are also there, which you have also rightly pointed out. So cumulatively speaking, we have to understand the entire what we call media autonomy, internet curbs, internet shutdowns, and other important activities which are generally resorted. Even then, how media, particularly the different what we call platforms like the social media or the OTT and other important aspects they have established in the subsequent weeks, we would also be deliberating these aspects. But it is, ma'am, it is equally important at this stage to understand what exactly has been the emergence of media as another important organ of the state. Because I feel, and I am of the well-considered opinion, that enlightened public with equal access to information has been a key ideal of the welfare states. Because the citizens should not only be informed, but the citizens must also be able and motivated to take an active what you call part in both political and cultural activities, which are generally encapsulates the role of the media. In a description of the cultural policy aims, many of the nation states, including the South Asian nation states, have been discharging their obligations, and they have been, for the dischargement of this kind of a responsibility on the part of the welfare state, they have been advancing some kind of a majoritarian narrative. And that narrative is basically propagating only one dominant culture. So the cultural activities are important, but as you have pointed out, that the diversity is equally important. Therefore, in some of the geopolitical entities, it has been argued that the idea that the media are cultural institutions important for the well-being and democratic participation of the citizens. And that has also tallied with the media user pattern characterized by commonality and egalitarianism, I should say. Although class differences do exist, people from all walks of life have enjoyed the same or similar what we call media. And the degree of cultural and political polarization, as you have pointed out, has been low. And these features are vital, ma'am, to our understanding, I should say, and political polarization, if we are really interested to understand what exactly has been the role of media and how it has emerged as one of the most important organ of the state, in addition to the existing what we call organs of the state. So it is very, very important to understand, because there is little use in applying elaborate policy measures, and particularly to media systems, if these do not what we call have consequences for the end user. This is how we have to what we call, whether or not a media system is beneficial to citizens can at least in part be assessed by analyzing to what degree people have access to and are where, and how they have been using various what we call manifestations of the existing media. So this is something which is very, very important, and we must what we call try to understand. At the same time, we cannot forget, when we are talking of emergence of media as one of the most important organs of the state in the current what we call situation, because impact of communication technology on democracy and social movements has been a fundamental issue in the fields of social or socio-political theory ever since the mass media, including newspapers, cinema, radio, were institutionally established and came to play a very, very important and vital role in the entire what we call socio-economic or socio-political milieu. And that is increasingly crucial for playing its role in articulating and mediating political communications. So this is how we should try to understand. And it is noteworthy, my dear friends, at this stage, that the recent advent and wide propagation of the social media, bound up with the internet, such as social networking sites and blogospheres, and these platforms tend to go beyond the limits of one-way communication that is embedded, I should say, in mass media and to foster mutual communications on an unprecedented scale. We are very soon likely to what we call, witness the arrival of the 5G. That is going to further what we call, enhance the various manifestations of mass media or mass communication, because we are going to witness a better what we call, a very accelerated form of latency. Latency is something which has become the bone of contention between these, 3G, 4G, 5G, 6G, and 5G and 6G. These kind of, communications technology are likely to arrive very soon. At least so far the 6G is concerned, that is going to take up another what we call, next 10 years, we would be witnessing, and very soon we are going to have the 5G technology. So that is also going to accelerate the entire what we call, I mean, it is going to pose a lot of, challenges in terms of, internet governance, in terms of the social media, because if we are, going to understand what kind of a latency we are going to articulate, because the speed, it is a question of, speed, how speed is going to encapsulate the entire what we call, content which is available on internet, and how this, latency, because it is going to generate some kind of a war of latency, war for latency. Latency is something when we click, we are having mouse in our hand, or we are, using this, touchpad on the laptop. So if I am, taking the cursor to a particular, word or a particular channel or the particular, website, then if I, push my touchpad, then how much time it is, going to take to open the page, intended page. So that is, I mean, the period between my touching of my, laptop's bed and opening of, website, how much time is consumed, that particular what we call, gap is known as latency. So it is a war of latency, and that we should try to understand, because that is going to determine the entire what we call, challenge of governance of internet. So that is another important, controversy, another important, challenge, because many players are there in the public domain who are basically, contending and contesting this kind of a, technology. My dear friends, since the late 1990s, diverse forms of social media have been engaged in social movements and election campaigns across the globe. Notable examples, my dear friends, include the initial utilization of mobile phones during the anti-globalization demonstration in Seattle, if I'm not wrong, in 1999. The enthusiastic, employment of the Facebook by Barack Obama, particularly Barack Obama's, election strategists during the presidential election in 2008. And the promulgation through Twitter and YouTube of the demonstrations in the wake of 2009 Iranian elections. Number of examples I can cite, though we are having a different kind of a story right now, because Elon Musk has already what we call struck a deal to buy Twitter by paying what we call 44 billion US dollars. So he is going to be the new owner of this very, very, I should say, one of the most strongest social media, that is Twitter. So what would happen tomorrow, whether it is going to propagate only the industrial objectives, corporate objectives, or the interest of a corporate house headed by Elon Musk, that still remains to be seen. Or whether it is going to honor the freedom of speech and expression as well as the freedom of media, that remains to be further what we call debated. But it is equally important, my dear friends, that there has been a wide range of discussions focusing on the increasing possibilities for the development of the grassroots what we call movements, more systematic representation of the public opinion, and direct communication between political powers and the public. Yet, so far my own individual understanding is concerned, my dear friends, many discussions have been overly preoccupied with the quantitative transformations of the public sphere and seem to share both an instrumental perspective on the effective use of social media in political mobilization and an overly optimistic standpoint on the improvement of the deliberative democracy driven by advanced what we call communication technology. As of now, my dear friends, a good deal less attention has been paid to a vital question about the changing nature of democracy per se. In conjunction, rather, let me further what we call supplement in tandem with the development of the communication technology. In this context, I should say, I would like to draw particular and very specific what we call attention to discussions of the media and the liberal democracy in early 20th century. For example, Germany, developed especially by the German Jewish social and cultural critique. How we have been developing the idea and ideals of democracy in South Asia. What exactly is the threshold and the nature of the democracy in Southeast Asia? What kind of a commitment and conviction we have been witnessing over the years in another part of the world, and that is highly turbulent, what we call part of the world, and that is the West Asia, Middle East and Far East. How we have been toying with the idea of what we call democracy. My dear friends, history is replete with these kinds of instances where we have already witnessed the diversity, multiculturalism, cosmopolitanism, as well as the pluralism has always been or have always been the victims and vulnerable when there is a question of what we call democracy. During the interwar period, a number of the radical German intellectuals, Mandarins, posed similarly perceptive questions and provided insights that still merit careful theoretical considerations in the current socio-economic milieu, I should say. In the context of interplay of communication technology and politics, early 20th century Germany can be characterized by the emergence of the fascist movements and the rapid growth of the new media such as radio and cinema. If you allow me to recall the Weimar Republic, both conservative thinkers like Klags, Oswald, and especially what we call Younger, and left-oriented liberal intellectuals like what we call Kurt, Thomas Mann, and other important what we call like Brecht, were fully conscious of this particular understanding, and they have given us some kind of a profound transformation. And during the primary response to the impact of mass media and politics, whether lamentations over the death of the deliberative politics or the enthusiastic embrace of an era of the mass politics, converged in the crisis of what we call of liberal democracy. My dear friends, these kinds of trends overshadowed by these or other political considerations, and political writers have also came out forward. And this reminds me of a very, very important what we call thinker, Benjamin, who grasped the changing dynamics of politics in connection with the rapidly growing mass media. In early 20th century, Western Europe and Russia, more importantly, unlike the conservative thinkers or the reactionary modernists, I should call them, they have taken a different kind of a line of argument. Or at the same time, Benjamin's critical insight into communication technology and mass culture enabled him to conduct a more penetrating investigation into the complex interplay between the mass media and the crisis of the liberal democracy and the rise of what we call fascism. But today, my dear friends, I see at this stage a very different kind of a world. I have deliberately shared this historical account with all of you, just to understand, my dear friends, we are witnessing the same world today. History is repeating itself. We are having the same kind of a line of argument which is being advanced. The same kind of a narratives we have been witnessing. And it is basically not only sometimes I feel that it is the media which is controlling the political discourse, and sometimes I feel it is the political masters who have ultimately made the media houses subservient and made them to believe in the philosophy of his master voice, and they have been basically dancing at the tune of their political bosses. And whatever the line of arguments are generally offered by the political establishment in all the geopolitical entity, including South Asia, these media houses have been dancing, and they are basically toying and falling in line, I should say. So in this kind of a scenario, how to understand what exactly has been the media, I mean political discourse and media freedom discourse in the public sphere? That reminds me, these early what you call civilizational narratives, if I am allowed to use this kind of adjective, that is civilizational what you call narratives, because renowned primarily as a literary and cultural critique, Benjamin's account of aesthetics politics or the pure politics has been mentioned only sporadically in the fields of social and political theory. So if you are really interested, and I will definitely intend to share today itself this line of argument, because we must try to understand, my dear friends, that what exactly has been the understanding when we are talking in terms of the internet governance and media freedom, because this is how we should try to understand. Though other important what we call arguments and narratives as well as theories are equally important, and you are free to share your line of arguments, because understanding the context in which media freedom operates, my dear friends, and that too in the digital age, requires some kind of a what we call going back to examine larger developments in the internet governance ecosystem. So this is how we should try to understand the emergence of media, how media has been dictating all kinds of discourses in the public domain, how media is controlling each and every aspect of how media is manufacturing, I should say, even the refugee issues, statelessness, democracy, liberalism, pluralism, cosmopolitanism, and how what we call economic development, including what we call globalization, as my friend Ms. Wasaf Rasool has rightly pointed out, the idea of globalization, and how that globalization is going into the what we call background. Even we have been what we call witnessing some kind of and that too in the name of globalization, we have been witnessing some kind of global privatization. So we have to create, we have to understand, my dear friends, further debates. At the same time, we have to understand this ongoing debate and discourse. Any observation as of now? Yes, Mr. Sagar.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, brother.
Yes, sir. So, I was also reading about Elon Musk. So, what do you think how it will be? Because now the company has turned into a private limited company, and uh, it has left, I mean, the public domain, and 100% is with Elon Musk. So, how it will be regulated? I mean, what type of laws would be applicable to such an organization?
It's $1 million
Um,
question.
Sir, I would also like to add something to Sagar's question.
Yeah, please,
I
please.
was listening to a very famous journalist, Mehdi Hassan, and he was actually pointing out that Elon Musk himself is a very big troll. So I think so. His idea of freedom of speech. I mean, Musk talks about freedom of speech a lot. So his idea of freedom of speech, I think, it clashes with our idea of democratic freedom of speech. So please shed light on this as well.
Yeah. His idea of free speech. Are you saying because he has been trolled?
Sir, he himself trolls people. If
Okay,
you
okay,
look at
okay.
his Twitter wall.
Yeah, okay, okay, okay. You're right. Yeah. Well, Mr. Sagar Verma, you have asked a very, very polemical, paradoxical, and convoluted question. And you have pointed out, Ms. Rasool, a very, very important dimension. And that is going to have some kind of a cascading impact, I should say, upon media freedom. Mr. Sagar, at this stage, and let me club both the questions, I cannot make any kind of a prognostic, but I believe your diagnosis is correct. But on the basis of your diagnosis, there is no treatment as of now. Though there is a treatment, and that treatment encapsulates the application of democracy, of free ideas, diversity of dignity, liberty of intellectual institutionalism, pluralism of substantive equalitarianism, and morality of transcendentalism. As a student of international media law, these are the 5 important features that comes to my mind instantly. And I believe that whether it is the technology, whether it is or technology or algorithmic driven media freedom, if it has to establish itself and its credentials in a democratic political setup, then it becomes the prerequisite of all social media platforms driven by internet. Because these algorithmic driven platforms have basically changed the fate of nation states and have been changing. Because the data, my dear friends, it can take and can create immense economic and social value. Data can capture or have been or has been capturing and conveying characteristics, shaping trends, formulating patterns, and these can be used as evidence and knowledge to shape behaviors, preferences, policies that will ultimately lead to real world transformations. In other words, let me put it like this, that these kinds of internet driven platforms or algorithmic driven platforms can catapult the entire what you call international, global, political, economic, and social scenario. These platforms can also make the world topsy-turvy. These kinds of platforms can also make people namby-pamby. And these kinds of social platforms can also make people ruthless, brutal. Because this is the power structure that is presented by internet. Because the emergence of this kind of a technology and application of this technology, and when this technology started transcending these kinds of democratic accountabilities, rule of law, and other important features, they result basically in the form of ruthless governance, draconian governance, one-sided what you call democracy, and they also incept a majoritarian narrative that creates for the minorities. And this has been the trend ever since we have started witnessing the emergence of information society, establishment of the knowledge society, internet or arrival of internet or ascendance of internet. All these kinds of developments have been made possible only because of the arrival of technology. So this is very, very important, my dear friends. Data collection or data investigation or data employment in this particular sense can serve a public good, a public what you call welfare, by informing the design, execution, monitoring, and evaluation of public policy and programs, and for building systems of what we call accountability, as it has been what we call the hallmark, the data for social good, what we call the theory of change. But what kind of a theory of change we have been witnessing? Because data are also, my dear friends, also a key to measuring and achieving the sustainable development goals, latest by 2030. On the other hand, my dear friends, data can be used for arbitrary commercial and political surveillance, for surreptitious what you call vulnerability and manipulations of the personal what you call agency, and for undermining the right to freedom of expression and of having opinion. And this is what we have recently witnessed, my dear friends, in the form of a software Pegasus, how it has been what we call employed by the ruling establishments across the jurisdictions. And for scholars, for lawmakers, for ordinary citizens working to advance freedom of expression and media development, data presented, my dear friends, and whatever the data has been employed and used to produce information, they communicate, this kind of a data communicate milestones towards the universal access to free, pluralistic, and independent news, and they help us to signal the roadblocks and the detours, whatever the bottlenecks are there. We try to what you call transcend detours them. So that is one of the most important what we call emergence, and that has been facilitated by the application of this kind of technology. A technology based on softwares, a technology based on ADMs, a technology based on what we call numericals, a technology based on what we call what McCarthy has rightly pointed out when he presented for the first time his research paper, and who is considered to be the father of the artificial intelligence. He was making a paper, a research paper in 1956. He presented this paper in United States of America. So you can very well understand, my dear friends, and we have to take into account these considerations while understanding this entire idea of free speech, and how Elon Musk is going to utilize this new form what we call liberty, and that too at the cost of what we call the 44 billion US billion dollars. So you can very well understand. But a question is still what we call, remains to be answered, and that is whether he is going to use Twitter for his personal projection, to serve his, his corporate interest, his trade interest, his industrial objectives, or as our friend, rightly pointed out, Ms. Vasaf, whether Elon Musk is going to troll others now, whether he is going to create some kind of a barrier, whether he is going to have some kind of a technological vetting of those what we tweets and those what we call inputs which are critical of him, whether he is going to sit in judgment as a censor board. Anything critical of Elon Musk would not be entertained on Twitter. Is he likely to indulge in this kind of practices? So all these what we call apprehensions, ramifications, assumptions are there in future, and we have to what we call wait and watch. So that is the only remedy at this stage. But as a student of law, this is my well-considered opinion that we should always try to be what we call to be optimistic. And the entire what we call agenda of the freedom of speech and expression is likely to be witnessed on these in this kind of a scenario, because given the central role to data in our societies, it is important, my dear friends, to analyze and interrogate how data are collected, produced, or distributed, and that is employed. So we have to what we call witness in future the veracity, authenticity, as well as the integrity and probability of these kinds of personalities like Elon Musk, how he's going to what we call manage all these things. So because we have to understand which indicators could shed light on progress in enabling freedom of expression and media development. And we have to at the same time help answer new and old questions. How can relevant data be identified, accessed, analyzed, and used to what we call track and predict and make some kind of a prognostication and bolster free, pluralistic, and independent media and safety of what we call the journalist at the same time. This is what I feel, Mr. Sagar and Ms. Wasaf Rasool. So let us wait for the better, because it is important what type of data that exists. We have to take into account which ones seem to be especially difficult to fill, and at the same time, what are the main requirements and priorities for leveraging the full potential of data to promote of expression and media development, even if these kinds of what we call platforms are likely to be managed, controlled, and owned by people like Elon Musk. So it is going to be, because we are also having a different kind of ownership of though that is that is equally important. On the last occasion also, when we were talking of access to information, I have pointed out that it is the responsibility, my dear friends, of people like Mark Zuckerberg, and we have to take into account how metaverse, a parent what we call company now, after re-nomenclatured, that is what we call managing Facebook and other, or including what we call WhatsApp, these kinds of platforms. Though every message, every call has been encrypted. So far, the WhatsApp communications are concerned, and they have been promising unpenetrable what we call or impenetrable technology. There cannot be any kind of a breach of privacy. So right to privacy is another important what we call dimension, which I would attend subsequently, but at this stage, it is equally important to understand the behavior of the new owners of these kinds of, how Mark Zuckerberg has been, behaving, because on many occasions, whenever the hate speech and any kind of, objectionable item has been, pointed out, that has been posted and carried on Facebook, so they have, in the name of their saving and safeguarding their business interest, they have refused in many geopolitical entities to remove those posts from the Facebook or from other social media, including Instagram and others. But at the same time, in case of Twitter, we have to witness what kind of behavior likely to be demonstrated or displayed for the general public on the part of the Elon Musk. Any other observation?
Yes, a while ago when we were discussing that how media is controlling political discourse, I think a very telling example of it is the former Prime Minister Imran Khan's social media strategies. I think his party is the first mainstream political party that is utilizing social media very effectively by formulating innovative campaigns, and their robust social media strategies have actually successfully allowed him to garner support globally and nationally, because his party knows the target audience is Generation Z and millennials. So if and I genuinely believe that if today Imran Khan comes back in the government, social media would be having a very major role in his success today.
Very true. As I have already pointed out, we have also witnessed this in case of Barack Obama's election. There was an allegation of Russian intervention. We have also witnessed Iranian election, as I have already pointed out. And we have also witnessed in South Asia. You have rightly pointed out in the context of Pakistan, but we have also witnessed this, how this kind of a digital platform, algorithms, and other important softwares and internet technology, how this has been shaped and utilized in the case of what we call the general elections, two general elections in India, 2014 and 2019 general elections for the parliament, for Lok Sabha, how these elections have witnessed, the use of information technology and use of what we call of internet in the management of elections, and what has been the breadth and reach of internet in our general elections. So it's become very, very important, man. And this is how we should try to understand, because this has posed a lot of challenges. And the biggest victim in these kinds of applications, in these kinds of employment of technology, the biggest victim has been the general masses and their what we call issues. So this is very, very important, and we should what we call we should not allow ourselves to be trapped by these kinds of technological advancements. So because when we are talking of the media freedom of expression and freedom of information that have been long recognized as the principles of internet governance, and these fundamental principles, these principles have been included in one of the finest what we call document, and that is the 2003 Geneva Declarations and 2005 Tunis Commitment of the World Summit on the Information Society. And given the cross-border decentralized nature of internet, an enabling environment for media freedom in the digital age requires a global what we call stakeholders, or multi-stakeholders, I should say. If we are having multi-stakeholder corporation and shared respect for human rights, or in a very detailed what we call account of two different reasons, I should say, or two different line of arguments have been seen to shape global internet governance debates in the recent what we call years. So, or if you take into account the debate which has been initiated immediately at the fag end of the 20th century and at the start of the 21st century. And Pakistan is not the first country. The political strategists of Tehreek-e-Insaf, they were not the first what we call individuals or group of individuals. That was not the first team to manage this propaganda machinery or dissemination of information, what you call, machinery. And that too, that has been successful or successfully fought at the hustings and mustered and garnered a lot of what you call, support for the, incumbent. Though he is no more the Prime Minister of, Pakistan, but he has been very, what you call, tactfully, immaculately utilized this, technology to his advantage. On the other hand, I can say some national governments, particularly the Central and Eastern European and Asia Pacific regions, have emphasized state sovereignty as an organizing premise of national and global internet governance. And that has also faced a lot of challenges. In some regions, Ms. Rasool, data localization laws, it has been a very, very controversial premise requiring that data be stored, processed, and circulated within a given jurisdiction, have been introduced to keep citizens' personal data in the country, both to retain regulatory authority over such data and to strengthen the case for greater what you call jurisdictions. Countries in Central and Europe or Eastern what you call European jurisdictions, Asia Pacific and South Asia, including what we call African regions, have all, they have been blessed with legislations requiring some localization. And there has been a rise in reported data localizations proposals and policies at the global stage, at the global level. But the trend has been particularly pronounced in the Asian and European regions. I can say, so far this particular trend is concerned, that is often based on arguments of enhancing national security, protecting personal privacy, aiding law enforcement and preventing foreign surveillance. But my dear friends, at the same time, we should not forget that the data localizations requirements increase the likelihood of multiple standards and the fragmentation of the internet. And that ultimately, limits the free flow of information. And in some, situations, in some instances, in some cases, my dear friends, increasing the potential for surveillance, which in turn impacts on the freedom of expression. At the same time, even the media freedom is also what you call, restricted. And on the other hand, so far, other side of the coin is concerned, the dominant practice has been towards a unified, universal internet with broadly shared norms and principles. There is a, organization, and this is a very, very important, organization, and that is Net Mandal. And its meeting was held for the first time, I think in 2015 or 2014. And that ultimately, produced a multi-stakeholder statement that the internet should continue to be, my dear friends, is some kind of a, coherent, interconnected, stable, unfragmented, scalable and accessible network of networks. That kind of a, argument came into public domain. And at the same time, I think in the same year, that is 2015, there was a general conference under the auspices of the UNESCO, another important subsidiary organizations under United Nations organizations, where the concept of the internet universality and the Rome principles. It is not Rome, it is not the capital of Italy, it is, or the, Vatican City, it is ROAM. Rome principles, which I will deliberate subsequently. Rome principles which state that the internet should be human rights based, R means. O, it should be open. A, accessible to all. And M, nurtured by multi-stakeholder participation. The Rome principles therefore combine and conflate standards for process to avoid potential capture of internet by a single power center, which corresponding risk. And that is the most important contentious issue, Mr. Sagar Verma, as you have pointed out. If Elon Musk tomorrow not going to adhere with these kinds of fundamental principles which have been agreed upon, as the idea of what he calls the network of networks, as an idea of what he calls the principle of universality, which is exclusively based on the fundamental principles of Rome, that human rights based principles, openness, accessible to all, nurtured by multilateral engagement or multi-stakeholder participation, then definitely it is going to be a personal fiefdom for Elon Musk, where as an individual he is going to regulate, control media freedom as per his personal whims and magazines. And that will pose a further challenge, because information has become weapon in the contemporary world. Internet has become a weapon in the hands of the what you call of American establishment. Internet should not behave and should not come out as a what you call or it should not be synonymous with the idea of the deep state. But on certain occasions, my dear friends, internet has become the deep state in United States of America. This is in my personal understanding I am sharing, and you are not at all under any kind of an obligation to emulate my line of argument. You are free, because if we are discussing freedom of speech and expression, if we are debating certain important nuances and niceties involved in the media freedom, then I should not dictate you, I should not regulate, I should not censor your line of argument. You are free, even in your writing. If you are answering a particular question, as a student of international media law, I am going to appreciate on critical footing, because these are the different kind of alternatives. What may be a limitation for you, it may be a liberty for me. And what may be a liberal what you call construction of argument, or an instrumental argument in my understanding, that may be obnoxious, offensive, and hazardous argument for you. So we have to, because what is important when I see freedom of speech and expression, my dear friends, I believe in self-regulation. Because it is our training, it is our value system, it is our education that must what you call regulate a human's personality inherently. Because it is basically, as I generally invoke this argument on other occasions as well, if you recall, I might have what you call advanced this argument, that it is basically the internalization of law. And when I say internalization of law, I'm basically talking of moral convictions and value commitments, which should be an inherent part of each and every individual's personality. And that is equally applicable in case of this kind of ventures, like owning Twitter, like owning Facebook, whether it is a private, what you call, as a private individual, or a public limited company, or the private limited company. So that has to be taken into account, because the fundamental position is for a global internet where these principles, so the principles of the human rights, driven the principles what we call, which is, advocate some kind of openness, which is accessible to all, which is generally reared, nurtured, and patronized by multi-stakeholder participation. That should be a frame which should be applicable in all regional, national, and local diversities. And in this context, my dear friends, significant objectives are media freedom, network interoperability, net neutrality, and the free flow of information. And that should not create any kind of what you call barrier to our understanding. And in addition, my dear friends, I should say that we should, receive and impart information across jurisdictions, across, boundaries, across, borders, and any limitations to accord with international standards. And at the same time, the model advocates that decisions on how rights are, balanced. For example, security, expression, privacy, integrity should be assessed with regard to the other important, pillars of what we call of, governance. Then only we can say that the media is, governing itself, or the media has become as another important, organ of the state. Because if that, mandate of state, a mandate of the welfare state, a mandate of state under international law, under Montevideo Convention, under Havana Convention, particularly these two important, conventions are important under the auspices of the League of Nations, because these conventions were, concluded in 1928 and 1933. So we should take into account, because we have to balance what we call, a specific balance I'm, talking of, that can have adverse impact on the essential openness of the internet or an accessibility, which, my dear friends, further, illustrates why internet decision making should be the best through a multi-stakeholder, what we call, modality or model. So this is how we should try to understand this entire debate or entire, challenges. Any other observation? Yes, my other friends. Yes, Ms. Karishma. Any further questions, observations, inputs?
No, sir. So I think so. Lucky has put some question in the chat box.
Okay. Oh, let me see. I'm sorry. Western media, there is a question from Mr. Lucky Singh. Western media has capacity to influence global narrative. This is very evident around 70% of Indian watch global news network, such as BBC, CNBC. Also, the online media player are such as Twitter, Facebook promote our Western narrative that we witnessed in Ukraine-Russia conflict. My question is, how can we counter Western media hegemony? My dear friends, I appreciate your question, Mr. Lucky, but I am having a different kind of a response. I basically believe, and my response is based on the moral textuality, and that is very reverential to me. Moral textuality means that instead of countering, instead of opposing, we should come out with the alternative media trajectory, or the global south or the South Asian media trajectory must incorporate honesty, integrity, probity, independence, rule of law, democracy, human rights, social justice. If we are going to have these kinds of what we call principles, or the principles, because we have to pay a price if we are going to have this kind of a trajectory of media freedom. Because the democracy is a very costly affair, my dear friend. Honesty is very expensive. Everybody cannot afford. When we are talking of neutrality and independence, then these are the, very big dreams. And these kinds of what you call, values, I perceive them as an alternative, not as a counter. Because we have to make a presentation of alternatives in terms of values, in terms of the governance models, in terms of what we call of the regulations, or in terms of internet management, in terms of accepting media as the another important organs of the state. We have to make a presentation of alternatives. Because this reminds me of a very, very important what we call asseveration that has been aired. And it has been rightly what he called said by Edmund Burke. And Edmund Burke was of the view that the small minds and the big empires cannot go together. And when he was making this kind of an argument, he was of the view, and there should not be any kind of a literal interpretation of the literal understanding of this kind of a semantics. Mr. Localization, when Mikhail Gorbachev has started as the Secretary General of the USSR, in 1991, when he started two important programs, openness, that was glasnost, and the perestroika. These are the Russian words. When he started these programs, what has been the result? The result, outcome. It was, the disintegration of the Russia as an empire. Though it was not the violation of the Bolshevik revolution-oriented constitution of 2017 of USSR. Because there was one of the most important clauses incorporated in the Russian what we call constitution that was promulgated to keep these what we call republics together under the umbrella of the USSR. That in future any republic can separate, can secede from the what we call USSR. And in 1991, when economic reforms were started, when openness was what we call as a project was started, what we have witnessed, because everything was not possible to control from the Moscow. Though it is a different story, in the subsequent circumstances, we are witnessing a new Commonwealth, which is consisting of the Commonwealth, which is popularly known as the CIS, a Commonwealth of Independent States, right now controlled by USSR. And how they have been controlling this conflict is a testimony to that very fact. Everything is having a price. So when we are talking of human rights, when we are talking of openness, neutrality, and some of the important fundamental principles, then we have to pay a price for all these kinds of luxuries of democracy. Because there has to be a democracy of the political remedies. When we are talking of this kind of a democracy, and that too particularly in the area of international media law, then definitely we are bound to what we call suffer and incur a lot of what we call losses. So we have to make certain important alternatives. Because there is a discernible distinction, my dear friends. It is not always good to emulate each and everything, and nothing should be taken as a gospel truth, whatever has been coined, produced, oriented, theorized in the Western world. Everything cannot be taken at its face value. No. It is going to be a very, very obtuse line of argument, and that should not be advanced. What is important is when we are saying that how to counter Western media hegemony, then it is important that we have to make certain reforms in our media coverage. If you take into account how the Hindi media or Hindi news channels have been covering this conflict, then you will not find an iota of truthfulness. You will not find an iota of, my dear friend, of veracity, authenticity. We do not witness any kind of a professionalism or professional institutionalism. Because you might have, witnessed in your jurisprudence classes, my dear friends, that the global South jurisprudence or Afro-Asian jurisprudence is exclusively based on duty-induced jurisprudence. Asian jurisdictions or Afro-Asian jurisdictions, on a larger what you call, context, I should say, the global South, jurisdictions have always advocated the idea of duties, not rights. It was for the first time which we have, witnessed. It was basically the argument, that instrumental argument, I should say, that was, and it has always been the inferential consequence on the part of the global South jurisdictions, and the global North jurisdictions have always advocated the idea of rights. And they have given the highest, what you call, and placed a category of rights on the highest pedestal of enjoyment, and that is the civil and political rights. And for the, advancement, achievement, and realization of the civil and political rights, my dear friends, the Western media as well as the establishment, governance institutions, they have disregarded and discerned each and everything. And the primacy in their, what you call, priorities has always been accorded to civil and political rights. So whereas in the global South jurisdictions, it was the duty that has been upheld. So we have to, preserve, we have to promote the constitutional conventions of the South Asian orientation or Afro-Asian, orientation. And we are failing our constitutions. Constitutions in our, jurisdictions. Even under the, South Asian, jurisdictions or the South Asian countries, the constitutions of this particular part of the world, a subcontinental, what you call, constitutions, haven't, what you call, failed us. We have failed them. We have become very subjective. As a teacher, this is my responsibility that I must, criticize you. It is your responsibility. It's a very sacred duty that if I am, committing some kind of a peccadillo or some kind of a wrong, you must point it out. You must, you should be very critical of me. But fair criticism, civilized criticism, accountable criticism, responsible criticism, and a moral criticism should be there. There should not be any kind of a, castigation based on what you call of, certain unacceptable, grounds. But this is what we have been, presenting, Mr. Lakisi. See the, fate of our English channel, Republic TV, Z News, Aaj Tak, ABP. See the behavior in Pakistan. How different what you call, news channels, Geo News channel. How different what you call, newspapers. It is, I am not at all discouraging that individuals and entities should not have some kind of ideology. But ideology remain an ideology. Ideology should not be the bone of contention, and for the preservation of that kind of ideology, some ruthless and brutal acts should be done against others. No. Others should not be detected. See the role of the Mr. Lucky Singh. See the role of the mass media during the global pandemic in South Asia, particularly in India. How even coronavirus has also attained some kind of a religion. Even we, the South Asians, have also given a religion, attributed a religion to global pandemic. Nobody is talking of the larger questions, that what kind of rights are there, what kind of a media freedom should be there during the global pandemic. And we are talking of hegemony, and we are talking of, I am not at all what you call discrediting your question. Your question is correct. But in the name of what you call of and you are right when you are saying that there is a hegemony. Yes, there is an hegemony. And what has been the result of this hegemony? The result is that the entire demographic composition of the Western jurisdictions is witnessing a sea change. In some of the markets in Belgium, I mean in Brussels, in Sweden, in England, particularly south of London, South Hall, and other important regions, you will not find Englishmen or the natives in plenty. Rather, the Afro-Asians, they have become in majority. Another important city like Leicester, what we have been witnessing. Because the result has been the migration. And that is why it was the political realization by the political leadership of the North, global North jurisdictions, including United States of America, that the United States of America, active participation, along with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and other important what we call international human rights stakeholders, they were able to realize this political nature of migration, and they came out with a declaration which is today known as 2016 New York Declaration on Refugees and Migrants. Entire diaspora, entire what we call canvas, demographic canvas of the global North has gone into a sea change. It was the result of this hegemony. It was the result of the policies and the policy formulations which have been presented through the Bretton Woods institutions of the 1944 and imposed and thrust upon global South jurisdictions. That is why we are having. Today, no country can claim that it is free from diversity. No country can claim that it is free from multiculturalism. Even in some of the jurisdictions, and so far their national identity is concerned, their national identity are based on, suppose Canada, its national identity is based on multiculturalism. So if they are espousing these kinds of what we call of value system in the name of hegemony, so they are basically paying the prices. They are witnessing that they are not free from. One day they could also be the victims of their own policies, and this is the result. So what is important, my dear friend, Mr. Lucky Singh, is that the democracy is not a cheap what we call commodity. Democracy demands most valuable phase of our existence. Democracy is not a periodic enjoyment. Democracy is not a periodic luxury. Democracy is an incessant perennial responsibility of high order. Then only we can survive, we can value this kind of luxury. Any other question? Would you like to say something, Mr. Lucky Singh, further?
No, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So please ponder over whatever the observations I have, submitted to in response to your question. Please try to understand the larger picture, because we can, talk, we can deliver, a separate, talk on this very question where we are, talking how to counter Western media hegemony. So that is not limited to hegemony. The larger question is also involved.
So there is,
Yeah, please, Mr. Saad. Yes.
sir, there is one question that I have in my mind, and it is related to the recent controversy that is happening in India about the namaz on loudspeaker and the recital of Hanuman Chalisa that is happening. So, I mean, can the state intervene in such kind of things, or is it fine? I mean, if to, because we are not here talking about some religious belief, because a person who is religious, he can practice his religion at any place. That is what I believe. But fundamentally speaking, the bigger question of law that is involved here is how the media is using, because there is no news after COVID. There is no news in India for any, like, after, I don't think if there is any election, then there is some news, and otherwise there is always a news related to religion or these kind of things. So what do you think? How these things can be, curtailed in a spirit of democracy, as you said, that it is, it is not at the wish and will of the people, and it should be carry forward in a way that it should be. So how we can balance it?
Uh, thank you very much, brother. Brother, as a student of law, as a member of civilized community of religions, as an ordinary citizen, as a law-abiding citizen of India, with this amount of experience and education which is before you, I feel personally that these are sham issues, manufactured issues. And it is basically a question of a pre-election trial and tribulations. And the political establishment is testing, and they are fishing in the troubled waters just to assess the situation, how they are going to win ensuing elections of Lok Sabha and assembly elections, I mean the provincial elections in some of the states next year and in 2024 elections. So it's a kind of a preparation. It's a kind of a pre-trial preparation to understand the trends at the hustings and what may be a new mechanism to have some kind of a polarization on caste lines and religious lines. That is one argument. My second submission or the second line of argument would be that in India, we do not require any kind of a law. Because law is sufficient if you take into account as an administrator or as a student of administrative law, the global what you call administrative law, the comparative administrative law at the SARC level, we are having adequate provisions in our penal laws. It is basically a question of application of certain important sections of the Indian Penal Code, or the Pakistan Penal Code, or the Bangladesh Penal Code, like Section 153A. That should be applied. Because there are certain requisite laws which determine the decibel of sound. Even if azan is being what you call pronounced, aired from the loudspeaker installed on a minaret of a mosque. It is not a question of what you call of religious freedom. It is not a question of the minority rights. Because I believe in minority rights, but I do not believe in minoritism or majoritarianism or majoritism. Because when there is a ism, it becomes subjective. When it doesn't behave as ism, it is very objective. We should talk of the rights of the majority people, rights of the minority people. Then we are basically talking of science. When we start believing in isms, any kind of isms, then we generally indulge into some kind of a hogwash, some kind of a nonsense. So I can understand minorities' rights of the violations of rights. I can understand what are the rights of the majority community in a geopolitical entity. Yes, that is understandable. Because that is the basic and the most fundamental message of higher education. that we do not think as the ordinary citizens of any geopolitical entity. We are not carried away by emotions or with emotions. No. People hailing from the higher education, they are the creatures of logic, not of emotions. And their emotions must also be regulated, because everything must be accountable to law of the land. So it is nothing but a political harakiri, whether it is Azan, Numan Chalisa, or whether it is hijab. It is not a question, because everything is being regulated within the prism of politics. We have created some kind of a political binary, and that is being what we call applied in each and everything. Because I believe, my dear friends, whether it is your vision, whether it is my side, it does not have any religion. If we are witnessing some kind of a what we call verdancy around us, so it does not have any religion. If we are talking of advancement, development of a geopolitical entity, it does not have any kind of a religion. And there is a lesson in our neighborhood. We should try to learn something from Sri Lanka. There has been some kind of a schism between communities in Sri Lanka. Muslims were targeted, Christians were targeted, Tamils were targeted, but so far their culture and lingua franca is concerned, that has always been same. But some of the communities have been branded and attributed, even the land order and other terrorists or terror attacks were attributed to a particular community. But what has been the fate? Everybody has become one because of the economic crisis. And they have forgotten their differences and they are on the same page. So you can very well understand. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we are one. So try to understand the larger what we call picture. Try to study Sri Lanka, and it is our responsibility as a student, as a stakeholder in the South Asian University, that we must understand what is happening in Sri Lanka, what has been the etiology of this crisis. We should try to understand what has been the genesis of this kind of a crisis. We should try to understand. If we do not understand the etiology, the chronology of this kind of a crisis, we cannot have a pragmatic, result-oriented, and dynamic solution of the economic crisis. So to me, my dear friend, it is a violation of the law of the land. Everybody should be taught, I should say, what exactly is there in the legal text. So plenty of laws are there. We should implement them. Everything cannot be what you call regulated on the basis of rebel rousing speeches and some kind of a political saber rattling. No. Because even in Aligarh Muslim University, my chamber and my office was always flooded with my Hindu students. I'm not at all saying that I had not been approachable, I had not been very lenient towards my Muslim what you call students. No. But I'm simply justifying, I'm simply what you call impressing upon you that there has not been any kind of a distinction on the basis of a religion in Aligarh Muslim University. Ask any Hindu student who graduated from the faculty of law of Geneva Muslim University, you will find. And today my students are the well-established what we call people in their life. They have been practicing in various high courts, Supreme Courts, district courts. Many of them have become the judicial officers, municipal magistrates, or the judicial magistrates. In entire, India, whenever I visit any city, if today I visit any city of, India, I will find my student in some kind of a, judicial or administrative or executive position. And they welcome me open-heartedly, very large-heartedly. So we have to, think beyond the box. Otherwise, there is no purpose of higher education, my dear friend. If we start, behaving like, ordinary students or the, ordinary people on in the street, no, we should not behave like that. We have to think what we can do. Then only we can establish an equal, egalitarian, law-abiding society. And same value system is applicable to the media houses. Just to garner some kind of a, additional revenue, just to generate some kind of a, additional revenue, and to have the what you call the highest or the better, TRP, we cannot what you call air each and every nonsensical, program on our televisions, Now we have been what you call, witnessing all kind of, vilification campaigns, vituperating what you call, wordings on the national, television. There have been what you call, fight and exchange of, derogatory what you call, language in each and every geopolitical entity of South Asia on national television. No geopolitical entity, no jurisdiction, no country in South Asia can claim that it is, television, national televisions are free from any kind of, verbal violence. No, lingual violence has always been there. So we have to, introspect ourselves first. What kind of a, value system, despite the fact we have always, emphasized, we have always what we call, advocated the idea of, accountable journalism. And here lies a larger, picture. What would be the future of journalism in different, regions of the world? Because there are, governments. There are, I have, deliberated the wrong principles. We have been witnessing a lot of what we call, situations at international level, at global level. We have been what we call, pointing out. We have been talking of the internet universality. We have been talking of the points, particularly the 4 points which I have, shared with you: the human rights-based openness, accessibility, and multi-stakeholder what we call, participation. But how to ensure the correct implementation of these kinds of what we call, values, and that too in a digital world. My dear friends, we have to understand, because this reminds me of a very, very important study of the 30 key initiatives aimed at establishing a Bill of Rights online during the period that starts from 1999 and goes up to 2015. That was the study that was conducted and carried out at the Harvard Berkman Klein Center, and this center found that the right to freedom of expression online was protected in more than what you call more than 30 documents internationally speaking than any other right. And similarly, my dear friends, the organizations, subsidiary organizations of the United Nations organizations like UNESCO. UNESCO has also conducted a study on the principles for governing the internet. And when this study was conducted, this study found, my dear friends, that the freedom of expression was mentioned in 41 of the 52 documents which have been what we call researched at this what we call center. Cumulatively, UNESCO as well as the Harvard's Berkman Klein Center of the Harvard University. And these initiatives, my dear friends, have been central to global efforts to establish consensus, ubiquity, and uniformity around rights, including media rights online. But what we have been, witnessing, social media has become a menace. Social media has become monstrous. It has become a monster, I should say. And these principles and other principles you can also take for internal governance have been debated globally through, among other forums, but all kinds of forums. Mainstream media has forgotten its fundamental responsibility regarding how to operate in a constitutionalized state. It has forgotten its responsibility. In major characteristics of the global efforts to realize internet universality has been the emphasis on multi-stakeholder, what you call, or idea of the multi-stakeholder, what you call, mass, where we find the broadening involvement in the decision making from states to include participation from civil society, the technical community, and the private, what you call, sectors, as well as recognizing the role of the media. My dear friends, I recall that the United Nations General Assembly committed itself to multi-stakeholderism in December 2015. Through a resolution extended this entire process and mandate for additional decade. And it further, adumbrated, I should say, the importance of the human rights and the media-based issues such as the safety of journalists and the equal participation of the women folk, or the gender parity in the entire media proscenium, I should say. So this should be the responsibility. But what media is doing, my dear friend, in India, it is basically concentrating on these kinds of issues, on manufactured issues like hijab, like eating habits, what should be eaten, what should not be eaten, what kind of a sartorial statement at public places should be made by such and such community, such and such individuals. So this is what we have been doing. So we have to take into account, my dear friends, that initially or in principle, I am against the concentration of media power into one single individual. And Mr. Sagar Verma, you have rightly posed this challenge in a form of a question. Then what would be the behavior and what would be the fate of the freedom of speech and expression when the Twitter-like of platforms, strong platforms, very robust platforms as of now, that is going to be under the shadow of individualism? Because I feel that there is a growing support for the multi-stakeholder model. And it was also observed in the internet assigned numbers, what we call authority stewardship, my dear friends. And ultimately, this authorization has also presented a kind of a transition in which oversight of the internet's addressing system shifted from a contract with the US Department of Commerce to a new private sector entity with a new multi-stakeholder accountability mechanism. And here I see the violation of this particular contract. Another result of the multi-stakeholder approach has been, my dear friends, an updated and considerably expanded idea of what we call of international law applicable to cyber warfare. This has also presented a novel what we call challenge. If you take into account, my dear friends, the Budapest Convention. Budapest Convention, on this particular point, let me remind you, that is exclusively on cyber crime and the meeting of the UN group of government experts on departments in the field of information and telecommunications So that is another important, and that too in the context of the international security, and that is mandated by the United Nations General Assembly, where we find that it has deliberated on norms such as protection of the critical infrastructure and the application of the international law to cyberspace. All this provides, my dear friends, the important context as developments in the cybersecurity laws increasingly affect media freedom. Because what kind of an allocation of this internet spectrum that is likely to be allocated and have been allocated by the various governments in different jurisdictions, that is also subjected to the political subservience. The extensive debate on these governance issues at the international level has also occurred at the regional level, though unevenly. If you take into account one particular period, my dear friends, so that is the period that starts from 2012 that goes up to 2016, you will find
Sir, you are on mute.
so, my dear friends, some of these issues are well crafted while taking into consideration your questions, your inputs, your observations that include introduction of data protection mechanisms, user generated content and its notification requirements, and reasonable data retention periods. Emergence, which ultimately impacted the emergence of media as an important, what you call, fourth glorious state, as the fourth glorious, I should say, very highly glorified organ of state. That should also be, further studied, and I would definitely be sharing some of the important, writings. I also intend, as our friend, a worthy friend, Miss Rasool has pointed out, not only we have to understand the entire, SAARC region in terms of the media freedom, in terms of governance of media and its various manifestations, but at the same time, she has also given the example of the media in China and Chinese behavior, Chinese media behavior. I would also intend to share some of important writings on that particular, But at the same time, many important dimensions, liberties, media freedoms, and media, autonomy, contain vague restrictions that could be used to curtail media freedom. By contrast, other countries, particularly in Latin America, which have ultimately pushed forward rights respecting interrelated legislation, including provisions on a variety of items, amount of data, particularly a company can retain on its users. And at the same time, we have to understand, my dear friends, the judicial review of take down requests for illegal content and a commitment to the principles of the net neutrality. And that has become the biggest victim. We should try to understand these dimensions as well. So on the next turn, I would be engaging you in a new engagement, but at the same time, I would also be taking into consideration this particular, strand of our deliberations, this particular thread of our, discussions. Meanwhile, I have a submission to all of you. Please submit your term paper. I would also make an email for that. But at the same time, I am equally happy that today I have been benefited from your questions, from your observations, prepare. And in advance, I would also be making certain important, readings for the next engagement as well. And today's deliberations. And on the basis of our, today's deliberations, I intend to welcome your formulations as well as your questions and your observations by email. So thank you very much for the day. If you have further questions, you are most welcome. And I'm sorry for the, a very, very brief, disconnection of internet. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yes, please.
Sir, hello.
Yeah, please.
Sir, I have a question about data localization, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, data localization. So when I was in my first year, I saw this news of a Cambridge Analytica, where the millions of data was leaked of Facebook, which was used in the campaign of election to pursue the voters. Sir, there's a Modi campaign also use the personal data of users. So how the data localization law will work to rule out this problem?
It's a very controversial, contention, because multinational corporations are of the view, even the national governments, where these multinational corporations have been situated, headquartered, located, they have been, and biggest, contention has been in recent years, my dear friends, where particularly in the first part of the, Modi governance in India, there has been a contention between United States of America and government of India. Localization is very, very important, because no national government is interested to make available its data, particularly the data of its citizens, to other national governments and other companies, because there are certain important implications. And one of the most important objection that is generally raised by the national governments is of national security, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. But if you take into account these arguments as a camouflage, you will also find that there are solid and very robust arguments, and that is the second layer of argument. The second layer of argument is basically the market oriented economic arguments are there, social arguments are there. Because if my data is available to a company that is located in United States of America or in some European country, so they are basically bound to influence, and they are in a better position to influence my pattern of purchasing, my behavior, my eating habits, my value system. Because if you browse for any kind of a electronic gadget, for any kind of a home appliance, for any kind of a book, you will immediately find that you start receiving that sort of what you call of ads. Ads are there, and they are soliciting, and you are bound to what you call click them. And because of the technological advancement, sometimes we are not in a position to remove the ads unless and until we see them in full. Same has been what we call, and this is how they have also created what we call ad-free what we call films, I mean subscription, and with ad subscriptions to certain important what we call channels on YouTube. So when data is not available globally, then these international entities would not be in a position to generate further revenue, and revenue would remain within the what we call country or within a particular geopolitical entity. So the market economic implications are also there, the social implications are also there, and the political implications. And in majority of the situations, my dear friend, it has been witnessed that it is the political implications, it is the political what we call exploitation of the internationalization of data. When the data is available at global level or international level, that is why these what we call cephalogist companies, I mean the companies which are involved in the generation of manufactured political opinion or the public opinion, they are in a better position to influence the outcomes of the very elections or the general elections in any geopolitical entity. They can shape, because it is the economic modalities, it is the political agenda, it is the foreign policy implications, it is the various doctrines, whether it is the disarmament doctrine, nuclearization doctrine, or whether it is the denuclearization doctrine. All kinds of what we call policy formulations are that is pumped into the minds of various citizens, I mean the various demographies at international level, and they have been influencing the outcome of the elections, outcome of what we call globalization, outcome of economic liberalization, outcome of the foreign disinvestment, and the shaping and the economic models. So this is how they have been what we call abusing, or rather I should say utilizing, if I am allowed to use this kind of a word, this is how they are making use of this kind of a data. So every nation state is right when it is not ready to share its what we call citizens data, and that is one of the most important question. Even initially that was asked by the same governance structure which is ruling today in India. They have posed the same kind of a question when the UPA government came out with Aadhaar project as a social security number. And because in previous what we call incarnation, for the first time this what we call Aadhaar kind of project was initiated in Germany, and the German people objected to it as a instance on the part of the national government as instance of racial profiling. So same kind of an argument has not been successful in the context of India, and again the government of India ultimately retained this very project. So localization of data is of vital importance. It is having a lot of implications, and I will also what we call elaborate further this understanding in the next engagement. And I will begin with three important what we call points with the localization and localization of data, number one, rather number three I should say, and then the globalization and its implication, and what has been the correct location and the correct what we call treatment, particularly in media so far the global south is concerned. And major part we have already covered in my earlier what we call solutions on these lines. And with this I take your leave to leave. If you have further questions, you're most welcome. So thank you very much. My dear friends, thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
See you soon. Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Take care.